Hello, and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today, I'll be showing you how to cycle from Wandsworth in southwest London to Stockwell in South London. This ride takes around half an hour, and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey also takes around half an hour, but requires a change of line. So cycling is a good option for this trip. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a big thank you to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute too, then you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting on Old York Road near Wandsworth Town Station. This street was recently pedestrianised in 2020 and is now a lovely place where people can sit out and have a drink. This was filmed quite early in the morning, so there weren't too many people around, but on a sunny day it can be quite lovely. I think Wandsworth Council is going to put a permanent scheme together to do a bit more public realm around there, as it's currently a temporary layout, so it should get even better relatively soon. It also creates quite a nice traffic-free cycle link to join this quiet route which we're going to be following for the first part of the journey. This is actually an old official cycle route which was introduced in I think the 1980s and 90s, called London Cycle Network Route 37. It mostly runs parallel to York Road and Battersea Park Road through Wandsworth and Battersea. It's a little bit on the wiggly side, but it is also very nice and quiet and a pleasant ride. Nantes Close, which we're on now, is a cul-de-sac for cars, so there's never any through traffic on it, and it is nice and quiet. Note that it's named after the French city of Nantes, and in a second we're going to be turning onto Tours Passage, which is named after the French city of Tours, or Tours in English. This little area under the railway has been nicely repaved since I last came down here, and is much nicer to cycle on than it was in the previous video I used this route on, which I think was a couple of years ago, although it does look like it needed a little bit of a sweep and a clean. Another improvement along this route that I've seen recently is on Mul Road, which we're on now. This street has always had too many cars parked on it, which narrows both the carriageway and the pavements. You can see the permitted pavement parking there, which isn't great, but it seems to have a lot fewer cars than the last time I came down here, which is pleasant. I don't know if Wandsworth has stepped up enforcement or what, but it was certainly a lot less of a squeeze to get down there than previous times I've gone here. Note that these works which were here when I filmed this video have now gone, so it won't be such a squeeze to get down there using that Toucan crossing which we were just on. Overall, this section of the route is quite a nicely done quiet way, connecting up naturally low traffic streets through estates and cul-de-sacs with decent crossings across main roads, as well as the odd shared path. One thing to be aware of in this bit of the route is Grant Road, which we'll be turning on to left in a second. Grant Road runs past the back entrance to Clapham Junction Station, which is on our right here, and it can get a little bit busy at times because it's a convenient pick up and drop off area for people accessing Clapham Junction Station by car. It's not fast moving traffic or anything, but it just means that there are people driving there making strange movements, so just keep an eye out for it. Fortunately, we're not on it for long. As we cut through Bramlands Close, you can see the cycle route signs there, which were leading us down there and into this Toucan crossing. You could just cycle on the carriageway here, but I'm just going to show you the little cycle path along the pavement, which to be honest isn't very good, but does drop you onto EST Road quite conveniently. Another very quiet street, which doesn't go anywhere for cars. The next turn is very easy to miss, so just remember that if you get to the sports ground in front of us, you've gone too far. We actually want to turn off quite sharply left, and if you look to the right among those trees, you can just about see a little bit blue sign behind that white van, and it's pointing you down this path. The wayfinding on this route is not fantastic. You can see there's the odd blue sign with the number 37 written on it. It is very, very old, so I'll let it pass. But if you need a bit more help to remember which way to go, you can always download the map of the route, which is linked in the description below. It's on a website called Komoot, and you can either use it in their app or you can just download the GPX file from that page. And that should work on whatever app or device you want. It is a standard format. The street that we're on now, Mul Road, by the way, is actually a school street, which means that in peak times for school pick-up and drop-off, it's actually closed to cars, which means that you shouldn't really run into too much school run traffic there, even when it is school. This was actually shot during the school holidays though, so you wouldn't see any anyway. This crossing here is pretty deficient, to be honest. The pavement space on the side of the road that we came from is far too narrow really for it to be a cycle crossing mixing with pedestrians, but it is what it is, and it gets us over to Burns Road. The streets in this part of town, which is rather cute and Victorian, also have kind of cool names. There's a Reform Street and also a Freedom Street, which runs parallel to it. It's quite a continental or Republican way of naming streets. We don't tend to go for abstract concepts in street names in this country so much, but I kind of like it. The reason that they have these kind of radical sounding names is because they're part of the Latchmere estate, which opened in 1903, and that was the first council housing estate to be built by a London borough, and also the first to be built by what's called direct labour, so workers directly employed by the council rather than through a contractor. So the naming kind of reflects the high ideals of the original concept of the estate, which was delivered, by the way, by John Burns MP, who secured a parliamentary act for the building of the estate and who is commemorated in Burns Road, which we cycled on earlier, just before we entered Reform Street. I would point out as well that once we left the estate there, on Sheepcote Lane and Roaditch Lane, there can be a little bit of traffic at some times of day. Obviously, this was filmed at rush hour on a weekday, so clearly there's not a huge amount, but those two little, probably 20-second bits of riding are not filtered. There is through traffic on them, so just make sure that you're careful there. And because if I don't mention it, someone else will point it out, yes, it's not technically Victorian because she died in 1901 and it was built in 1903. Now, we do have to cross Battersea Park Road here, and there's not really an adequate crossing. If things get too busy, you can dismount and use the pedestrian crossing, which was just to our left there, but I just waited for a gap in the traffic and went on to Alexandria Avenue. The same is true here. If you can't find a gap in the traffic, then you can dismount and use the zebra crossing and then cycle into Battersea Park. You are allowed to cycle on certain bits of Battersea Park. These outer paths here seem fine, and the main carriage drive, which we'll be using for the rest of our time in Battersea Park, is also fine. Obviously, remember, although there is a pavement here for pedestrians, this isn't a real road, it's more of a big path, and we are sharing it with pedestrians, so just make sure that you do ride sensibly and courteously while you're on here and give people plenty of space. We do have plenty of space here after all, it's a very wide path. If you look at the lamppost on the right here, you'll also see that there's apparently a 12-mile-an-hour speed limit. I suspect that that's meant to be directed at bikes rather than joggers. Obviously, most bikes don't have a speedometer, so it's kind of theoretical, but just make sure that you're sensible as you cycle down here, and I think you probably should be fine. For those that don't know, Battersea Park, the main carriage drive is basically a big circular loop running around the park, and we're going around it anti-clockwise at the moment because we've entered in the southern end of the park and we want to leave in the northeast corner. If you've got plenty of time, you could go clockwise around it as well. It probably would only take a minute or so more. This park is very nice, as you can see. It does theoretically close at dusk, although when I've said that before in videos and I've used it in routes, I have had locals telling me that apparently it does stay open a little bit later than suggested on the sign, so can be useful for commuting back in the evening in the winter months when it gets dark early. I haven't confirmed that. I'd be interested in the comments if anyone wanted to let me know if that was still true. Nevertheless, if you do get caught out, then you can still bypass the park relatively easily. You can use Prince of Wales Road, which we cross to get into the park, and Queenstown Road, which runs along the eastern side of the park to go around it. And Queenstown Road should hopefully in the next year or so be getting proper cycle lanes, protected ones. It does have them in one direction at the moment, but they're not amazing. And when that happens, you won't have to go in the park at all, unless you want to, that is. It is a pretty nice place, as you can see. Now, don't forget to turn off left here, because we're going to head for the Thames path. Now, if you studied the map at the beginning, you might see that this is kind of a wiggly route. We're sort of going around Battersea Power Station. The reason we're doing that is to avoid the main road and to avoid the big mess of railway lines, which is around this part of town, around Battersea, sort of east of Clapham Junction. You might have spotted those trains running on that massive railway viaduct. This viaduct runs into Victoria Station, so you might have spotted there was a southern train on there, a southeastern one, and also a Gatwick Express, I think, stopped on the bridge. This part of the Riverside Walk is shared with pedestrians, as are the grounds around Battersea Power Station, so again, do make sure you're courteous as you cycle through here. It is nice to see that blue cycle route sign up there on the lamppost, though, explicitly permitting cycling through these gardens, which is not always the case when you see a new development like this. Normally, by the way, I would cycle on the right here where this fake running track is. I think that's a promotion for the Olympics, which can probably tell you when this video was filmed. It was filmed over the summer. One thing to watch out for on this otherwise entirely traffic-free street are these kind of nasty, quite bumpy plastic speed bumps which have been laid over the road. Nobody likes to ride over those, so you can usually bypass them by going around them if you find them painful. Then just before you get to the main entrance to Battersea Power Station, you turn left down Prospect Way, which is quite a busy street which is shared with pedestrians again. So again, just make sure you give everyone plenty of space and don't ride too quickly down here. At the end of the street, you'll come to a set of traffic lights. Now, I think that these traffic lights are active. I've never actually been able to trigger them to get them to turn green. I think the detector only works for cars. But fortunately, we're not crossing the road or anything. We're just going to turn onto these cycle tracks and then use this crossing and wait for a green light to send us into Thessaly Road. Now, Thessaly Road is pretty cool actually. We're still in the London Borough of Wandsworth here. We have been for pretty much the entire journey so far. And yeah, this is an unusually cycle-friendly street for Wandsworth, which isn't a borough which has a great record when it comes to cycling generally. It's closed at one end with a modal filter, but it has a cycle path leading onto it and that cycle crossing as you saw. So the street itself is pretty quiet, but it also has this two-way protected cycle lane running alongside it. It's nothing particularly fancy, it's just got these stick down plastic curbs, but I actually wish that this style of curb was used more often in cycle lanes in London. I don't think they're too expensive and they do a decent job of separating us from traffic. For a two-way cycle track, it's a bit on the narrow side, but it's a relatively low traffic route anyway, so I don't think it matters too much. One issue is that the cycle lane does abruptly give up there, and the reason it gives up there is because that is the borough boundary between Wandsworth and Lambeth. Now, Lambeth is generally a pretty good borough when it comes to cycling, certainly when it comes to reducing traffic and doing low traffic neighbourhoods, but that was a Wandsworth scheme, I think paid for with community infrastructure funds contributed by the developers at Battersea Power Station, so it's not continued into Lambeth. It would be nice to see Lambeth maybe redesign that junction and continue the track there, because you do have to swerve out from behind a parked car to get there, which isn't ideal. But we continue our journey in Lambeth on pretty quiet streets. Larkhall Lane here is filtered at one end, so has generally not too much traffic on it. You'll see one or two cars. but that's about it. By the way, I should mention this more often. A viewer called Isaac, who is a legend, has done a brilliant map of all the different London cycle routes videos. You can just browse the videos by map, so you can look at the different areas that you're most interested in and see what videos have been done in that area. I always link it below the videos in the description, but I don't mention it anywhere nearly enough in the commentary. So if you haven't seen that, you should totally check that out, and you can see what videos you've missed in areas that you're interested in. Or if you're planning a particular ride, you can see what videos I've done there and see what routes I recommend. Now we're approaching our destination of Stockwell. We're going to stop by the tube station and the Swan pub, which I think is the centre of Stockwell, but we're arguably there already, coming through the estates. These streets are generally pretty quiet, although they're narrowed by parking quite a lot, and unfortunately this van here does slightly spoil it by nearly running me over. Binfield Street here is closed to cars. It just has a bus route along it, so it's always really quiet and anyone could cycle on here. I actually dismount here and we're just going to walk up to the tube station and take a little look at the main junction. But yeah, basically we're here, so thanks very much for sticking with me through that. As you can see, the route is pretty wiggly, as I mentioned earlier. That main wiggle is just as we approach that big block of railway lines, because there isn't really a chilled out way to cycle east-west along that railway once you get to that huge railway junction that you can see on the map. So we do that bit of a detour via Battersea Park. Now TfL does have plans to put protected cycle lanes on Battersea Park Road, but the last time I looked, they kind of gave up at the junction past the railway bridge, which isn't ideal, and I think I'm going to have to wait until they're constructed to decide whether or not they're actually good enough to route people down, because it didn't look great in the plans, to be honest. But if you want to see more routes around this part of London or other parts of London as well, make sure you hit subscribe on the channel, as I post new videos every week. And just want to say a big thank you again to everyone who has signed up on the Patreon. I really appreciate it, and it really helps keep the channel going and helps me producing all this content every week for you. I do occasionally miss a week, but I think we've been pretty good. Anyway, let me know what you think of the video in the comments, and any other ideas or suggestions you have. I'm always open to hearing them, and I will see you again next time. Goodbye.